During this period of time, all the families would be huddled up together in the houses. So normally they live in different houses. All the families would come together in one house, lock the doors. The men would be sitting there with shotguns. The women would have machetes. And they would hear these guys, these assailants, moving around in the village. One lady told me they were even trying to pull the boards off the side of her house. This assailant was floating off the ground, about a meter off the ground, when he shot him at point blank range. When he shot him, this is always at nighttime, by the way. When he shot him, the guy, from the blast of the shotgun, he was knocked back on his butt. These are the legendary Pelacaras, face peelers. It's very much like a cattle mutilation, and this technology, at least to some extent, has been derived from alien technology, from non-human technology. Let me add another level of mystique into this situation. This is Timothy Alberino, and you are watching End Times Productions.
End Times warrior rise, fight the dark with light in eyes. Fallen angels face their fate. Hero stands at heaven's gate.
So back in mid-July to early August, maybe into the first week of August, a series of videos hit social media and went viral, almost instantaneously. And these videos depicted, in one case, it was a group of villagers from a remote village in the Peruvian Amazon who were in a state of panic. It was nighttime. They were running around with their flashlights and shotguns, and they were discharging their firearms into the jungle. And in subsequent interviews with the Apu of the village, the chief of the village, and some of the other villagers, it was revealed that they were encountering this very strange phenomenon of these entities, these assailants who were flying around on some kind of an apparatus, some sort of a technological apparatus, and were able to float off the ground, a meter off the ground, who seemed to be impervious to gunfire, and had attempted to abduct and cut the face off of a 15-year-old girl in the village. That video went viral. Subsequent to that video, a couple other videos emerged. One of them was of an incident that happened in the jungle city of Nauta, not far from this village, near the city of Iquitos, in which same sort of a scene. It was nighttime. People were in a state of panic. One guy had a flashlight, was flashing the light up into a tree, and he was shouting, "There it is, there it is," and there appeared to be something in the tree, perhaps even a large gray alien or an insectoid or something like that. But it was, of course, very grainy, very low-res video. That was making the rounds, and a couple of other videos as well. During this time, during the same period of time, we were hearing reports from the Peruvian Amazon of strange encounters with UFOs. There was a couple of people who apparently they had this encounter, this hostile encounter with a UFO that emitted some sort of a laser or beam of light at them and was picking them off the ground, something like this. Also, there was a group of students who were doing some sort of a project in the jungle, and they collectively saw some sort of a strange being walking through the forest. And so it was obvious that something very bizarre was happening in the Peruvian Amazon. Many people in my audience were asking me to go there and investigate because, as people know, I lived in the Peruvian Amazon for 10 years. I speak the dialect of the jungle, which is called Charapa, which is Spanish mixed with some Quechua. That's really where I cut my teeth as a young man, was in the Peruvian Amazon. That's where I learned Spanish. And so it seemed like I was predestined to go and do this investigation. Unfortunately, when all of this broke out, I didn't have my passport. I'd sent my passport away to get renewed. So I'm sitting there getting emails every day and on social media, people DMing me and asking me, please go investigate. Nobody had gone and done a competent investigation. The police did show up because of the attempted abduction of this 15-year-old girl. Her name is Talia. They conducted what I describe as a piss-poor investigation. They had to investigate. They had a Navy escort, but only these 2 police officers actually conducted the investigation in the village of San Antonio de Pinto, Yaku. I should say that the first video, the one that got the most traction, was from this remote village called San Antonio de Pinto, Yaku. Pinto, Yaku is the river. Extremely remote village. We're talking 2-day trip up the river from the city of Iquitos. The village, there's no roads. You can only get there by the river or by helicopter. And this village is one of the last villages on the river, and north of this village is nothing but virgin Amazon jungle. There's nothing there. It's just wilderness. So it's a very remote location. And the police, when they went to conduct their investigation, they concocted an absurd story. They said that the village was being attacked by river miners who were using advanced jetpack technology. And they were possibly being funded by the cartels. And the objective of these jetpack miners was to drive the villagers off their land so that they can mine in the river around the village. This, by the way, is the Kitu community. The villagers are members of the Kitu community, very old community in the jungle, very important community. And so this concoction by these police officers, it became the official narrative. The story was receiving a lot of press in Peru. The Peruvian media was very interested in the story. It was a big mystery. It was being covered in a very serious manner by the Peruvian media. And once the police officers came forward with this concoction, this fabrication, the Peruvian media ran with it. Case closed. It's miners with state-of-the-art jetpacks, and the American media ran with that story. News Nation brought on, I don't remember the guy's name, brought this guy on who was like, oh, it was just miners with jetpacks, mystery solved, case closed. And it was absurd. I had lived in the Amazon. I knew that this was absurd. Ultimately, I decided to mount an expedition after receiving my passport. So I chartered a riverboat, and I decided to, after making contact with the villagers, I decided to also provision the village with food and medical supplies and strategic technology, because I learned from the villagers that since these incursions have been happening by these strange assailants, they've been living in a state of terror. They haven't been going out to their, what's called their chakras, their little farms around the village, because they were afraid that they were going to be assaulted. And so the village was in dire need of supplies. So I determined that if I was going to go and do this investigation, I wanted to make sure that I provisioned them as well. I want to thank the guys from Conduit Church, Pastor Darren Tyler, my friend Jamie Brandenburg, and this group of guys from Conduit Church in Tennessee who helped me fund the expedition. They co-funded the expedition with me. It wasn't cheap to charter a riverboat and supply the village, and to buy the technology that we wanted to supply them with as well. I purchased high-powered flashlights, radios, a thermal binocular, and night vision goggles. And the reason why I decided to equip the villagers with this technology is because they were nightly, the men of the village were patrolling the village because of this threat, because of these incursions that were happening. And I knew they needed technology. All they had was very low quality flashlights. They were experiencing these incursions into their village by these strange assailants. And it was happening for a period of a month. And the villagers were in a state of heightened vigilance, and as I said, there was an attempted abduction on one of the girls in the village, and And they were confronting these guys face to face, shooting at them. Oh, this was physical confrontation. This was an aggressive confrontation with physical beings. They were shooting them with their shotguns. I was fortunate that my colleague Doug Thornton decided to go with me. Doug is an ex-infantry Marine and DHS rapid response operator. And so Doug helped me choose the equipment that I purchased for these villagers, equipment that would help them on their patrols. By the way, the night vision goggles that I bought for them have recording capabilities. So after getting all of the provisions and organizing the expedition, Doug and I set out on the 23rd of October to Iquitos, Peru. That's the nearest city. Iquitos, you can only get there either by the river or so by boat or by airplane. There's no roads that go into Iquitos. Iquitos itself is very remote, one of the most remote cities on Earth. And then from Iquitos, you have to go up the river. You have to go up the river Nanay and then transition to the river Pintu Yaku, go up the river Pintu Yaku. It's a 2-day journey into the jungle to get to San Antonio de Pintu Yaku. We made the journey. It was quite an adventure. And when we got to the village, we were met at the village by a small army of villagers with shotguns. I should say that I mentioned I had made contact with the village. I had an official invitation to come and do the investigation from the chief, the Apu. They call him the Apu in the jungle. The chief's called the Apu of the village. Jairo Reategi is his name. And the elders of the village formally invited me to come investigate. So when I got to the village, by the way, the Apu accompanied me up the river. So he went on the boat with me with a couple of guys from the village, including a young man named Christian, who was the one who filmed the incident that went viral. So those guys went up the river with me on my riverboat, and I brought all the provisions and the technology with me on the boat. I was met at the village at the shore of the village by the men of the village with their shotguns. And I also brought, by the way, 2 active duty Navy, jungle survival Navy operators with me. Peruvian Navy guys with me as security. And so I had this small team of guys, and they received me and my team with great affection, and I gave a speech in the village. And by the way, I made a video about all this. It's on my YouTube channel. And they even did like a traditional Kitu dance for us, where the villagers were dressed up in their traditional garb, and they came out and they did a dance for us, and they gave me a bowl of masato to drink, and this is all very customary in the jungle, very formal sort of a thing. And so after being received so graciously by the Kitu people, we began our investigation in earnest. And what we discovered was shocking. We began to go around the village, and I began to interview the men and women who have been encountering these assailants. And they described to me what had been happening in great detail. So I will give you a summary of what they told me. What they told me is that the village, in the months prior to my visit, had been experiencing a period of time in which continual, almost nightly incursions were being made into the village by very strange assailants. These assailants were dressed in black, head to foot, in black armored bodysuits. They wore helmets that were elongated in the back. The helmets had yellow tinted eye lenses, almond shaped yellow tinted eye lenses. They had some sort of body armor on. It was metallic. One individual swore to me that he shot one of these guys, and this individual was wearing silver body armor. And the villagers told me when they would shoot at these guys point blank range, 16 gauge shotguns, usually birdshot, sometimes they would modify the pellets to make larger slugs. They would literally hear the rounds, the birdshot bouncing off of the armor, of the metallic armor, dinging off of the metallic armor. So these guys were wearing state-of-the-art body armor. They were exceptionally tall, at least 6 foot. Most guys had them between 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall. Some of the people in the village even described them as being 8 feet tall. That might be an exaggeration. But the bizarre thing about these assailants is that they would, before they landed, before they made their incursion into the village, they would be flying over the village on circular hoverboard platforms. And so the villagers, the way that the incursion would start, the way that the incident would begin, the villagers would see these saucers flying around. That's all they would see, are these saucers with a series of lights around them, flying around in the sky, no sound, silently. And the villagers would describe them as like drones, like large drones. But when they would flash their flashlights on them, or if there would be like some lightning in the background, they would see somebody standing on top, like surfing on it. So these guys, these assailants, would land these circular hoverboards. They would land them in the jungle, and then they would come into the village. They would make an incursion into the village through the forest. Not only are they flying around on these discs, but when they dismount from the discs, apparently they have some sort of technological apparatus on their footwear that allows them to hover off the ground. So sometimes they're described as walking, and many times they were described as floating. In fact, the gentleman that shot the assailant at point-blank range, who says he was wearing silver, most of them were described as wearing black armored bodysuits. This guy says the one he shot was wearing the same kind of bodysuit but silver. He said that this assailant, was floating off the ground, about a meter off the ground, when he shot him at point-blank range. When he shot him, and this is always at nighttime, by the way. When he shot him, the guy, from the blast of the shotgun, he was knocked back on his butt. So he's floating, he gets hit with birdshot, 16-gauge shotgun, point-blank range, and the shotgun blast knocks him back on his butt. And then he just, as if it didn't harm him whatsoever, he just bounced back up in the air, just leapt back up in the air, and then shot off into the sky. Or if not into the sky, just departed, but floating, right? So he shot, he falls back, he bounces back up, floating, and just flees, basically. And this was described to me by several different guys who encountered these assailants floating, okay? Sometimes they're floating around on their discs, on these circular hoverboards, right? Other times they're floating around just whatever technology is on the bottom of their footwear, whatever sort of technological apparatus they have that allows them to float. They can apparently do both. So I think that what's happening is these guys have some sort of, by the way, there are 2 discs on the bottom of their shoes, one in the front, one in the back. So when they make tracks in the ground, it looks like 2 circles, right? So you have one shoe, 2 circles, the other shoe, 2 circles. That's what the tracks look, and they are very large. All the villagers, so many of them told me their tracks are huge, and they're very strange. They're circles, but they were very clearly visible. They weren't when I was there because this was, 2 months previous to me arriving, and it had rained a lot, and so all the tracks were obviously gone. So there's some sort of technology that they're deploying on the bottom of their shoes that allows them to levitate and also do other extraordinary feats, such as one lady told me she saw one of them jump over her house. Okay, so I want to distinguish these 2 technologies. You have the circular hoverboards that they're flying around and then landing, and then you have the technology they're deploying on the bottom of their shoes, these discs on the bottom of their shoes. All of this was described to me in great detail. I think that the discs on the bottom of their shoes, they'd probably magnetically snap into the boards. That's just my assumption. But when they flee, they go back to their boards. They go back to these circular platforms, and they remount them, and then they take off. When they're on the boards, they have the capability of shooting up into the sky at high rates of speed. These assailants, these strange assailants, were surreptitiously coming into the village. They were encountering the villagers. The villagers, as I said, would shoot at them. And they were attempting to abduct people, apparently. One lady in the village told me that during this period of time, all the families would be huddled up together in the houses. So normally they live in different houses. All the families would come together in one house, lock the doors. The men would be sitting there with shotguns. The women would have machetes. And they would hear these guys, these assailants, moving around in the village. One lady told me they were even trying to pull the boards off the side of her house. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But she said that they would be like pounding on the doors, trying to pull the boards off the houses, almost as if they were just trying to terrorize the people. However, there was an incident in which this 15-year-old girl named Talia was nearly abducted. Talia is, the first thing you have to understand about Talia is she's very traumatized. I wanted to interview Talia. That was one of my primary goals, was to interview Talia and to hear from her directly what had happened, because I had seen an interview with her online that Christian had filmed previously. I went into the village one evening to interview Talia, and all of the villagers in the evening play volleyball and soccer. All the women play volleyball and men play soccer. And so they're all out there having a good time, and there's Talia sitting by herself up against a house. And she's just sort of sitting there by herself, observing the others playing volleyball and soccer. And as soon as she saw me and Doug in the village, as soon as she saw us, she began to tremble and cry and hide her face from us. She took her hair and she moved it over to the side of her face so we couldn't see her face. And she's just sitting there trembling. We wanted to approach her and talk to her. And so I was with the chief of the village and her father. And her father went and got her and brought her over, and she was just shaking like a leaf. I mean, she did not want to talk to us. She had severe PTSD. She was very traumatized. So the Apu suggested that we go to her house the following morning. Her father assured me she's going to be all right. She'll be willing to talk tomorrow morning. And we made it clear we just want to investigate and hear her story. And so we did return the following morning after breakfast, and her father convinced her to come out and talk to us. It took her a while to talk. She just stood there and shook like a leaf for a while. And it broke our hearts to see this girl in this traumatized, post-traumatic stress. She was just a mess. She was a mess. Eventually, she began to tell me what had happened. She began to tell me the story. And what happened was Talia was picking some fruit from her tree just after sundown, picking some fruit out of the tree with this long stick. A piece of fruit, she knocked it out of the tree, it fell to the ground. She bent over to pick it up, and she noticed, she felt a gentle wind at her back, and she noticed the dead leaves rustling around. So she turned around to see what it was, and what she saw was this individual dressed in the manner I previously described, a black armored bodysuit with an elongated helmet, the almond-shaped, yellow-tinted eyes. He was floating on a disc, on a platform, a circular hoverboard platform, like surfing on it. In her backyard, there's a little gully. It's forested, so there's jungle back there. Surrounding this gully are her neighbors. So this isn't on the outskirts of town. This is in the middle of town. So like her backyard is some jungle, some forested area. It's a little gully. She saw this guy floating up the hill. He landed next to her, and he grabbed her and covered her mouth with his hand. As he has her in this position, she looks over and she sees another guy coming up in the same manner on a circular hoverboard platform. Silent, by the way. He floats up, lands in front of her, and grabs her legs. Now, keep in mind, this is just after dark. This was not the first incursion by these guys into the village. A previous incursion had happened in which one of the villagers saw these guys coming into the village and shot at them. So the village was on edge. They were in a state of vigilance at this point. The men are, after dark, sitting on their porches with their shotguns and flashlights. Okay, so that's the context of this particular encounter. Now, these assailants, they have Talia in their arms. One's got her legs. One has her from behind with his hand over her mouth. They lift off into the air on their platforms, and they carry her behind a thatch roof chicken coop that's in that gully in the backyard. When they get her over there, they proceed to take out this powder and this liquid, this cream, and they mix it together. They take a nasal syringe and they suck it up and they shoot it up her nose. This is obviously some kind of narcotic sedative that puts her into a more manageable state, makes her very docile, and kind of puts her out of it a little bit. Although she's still conscious, she's sort of coming in and out because of whatever this narcotic is that they shot up her nose, the sedative. After they do that, they proceed to mix a different cream. They take out a larger, almost like she described it as like a large toothpaste container, and they smear it all over her face. And as soon as they apply this cream to her face, she said her face went numb and began to swell up. Now, what's unique about Talia's testimony, she had this very close encounter with these assailants. She told me that she heard them speaking. She describes them as the one is the gringo and the other is the Peruvian. The reason why she calls them this is because the taller one, who was taller than me, was speaking broken Spanish with a gringo accent. The other one, who was a little bit shorter, was speaking typical Peruvian Spanish, according to her. She said that when the guy that had her from behind, she calls him the gringo, when he was smearing the cream on her face, the other guy said to him, "Be careful, don't put too much on her face, you're going to ruin the flesh." That's what she said. And I asked her about that later, like, what does she mean? What does she think they meant by that? And she said that what they meant was that it was going to make it difficult, if they put too much cream on, it was going to make it difficult to separate the skin of the face from the tissue beneath, from the flesh beneath. That's what she told me. So after they put this cream on her face that numbed her face, swelled it up, they took out a small device, which Doug and I believe is a laser scalpel, the way that it was described to us, and they proceeded to cut to make an incision. They made 2 incisions under her jawline because she, at this moment, she began to really struggle hard, right? Like almost like a last ditch effort to break free. She's struggling and she manages to get her arm up and she starts to push the helmet up of the guy that's holding her from behind, the gringo. She's pushing his helmet up, and he obviously doesn't want her to see his face, so he starts to struggle with her, and the guy in front of her, the Peruvian face peeler, let's call him, slaps her in the face. And when he slaps her in the face, they momentarily lose control of her, they drop her, and she's able to scream. So she lets out this blood-curdling scream. Now, as I said earlier, the village is already in a state of vigilance. So when she screams, her brother and her father are sitting on the porch with their flashlight. Her neighbors are sitting on their porches, right? So they instantly come running. In a matter of seconds, they're on the scene. Now, Talia says that after she screamed, the Peruvian face peeler started to take off on his hoverboard. And he yelled back to the gringo, who was still struggling with her, "Let her go. We need to go. Let's go." And he responded, "No, we can't just leave her here." This is what she says she heard. He proceeds to grab her by her hair and drag her. Now, he's floating on his hoverboard, and he's dragging her by the hair. And this is the last thing she remembers. I think she just went unconscious after this. He dragged her up the hill. And apparently he was going to try and take off with her. I don't know. But this is the state that the neighbors found her in. So when the neighbors are on the scene, suddenly they're on the scene, they've got their flashlights, they see Talia lying on the ground, bloodied from the incision, and 2 assailants dressed in black, and these guys are like surfing on their circular hoverboards. And the villagers have the flashlights. There's a group of guys that are now standing around. They got their flashlights right on these dudes. And these guys are sort of in a state of panic now because they got to get out of here. And they maneuver over to an area where the vegetation is open above them. And they shoot up into the air. While everybody's watching. These villagers are standing around. These guys are standing around with their flashlights on them. So Talia's brother runs over to her, picks her up, brings her into the house, and they begin to administer first aid, and she's out of it. She's unconscious at this point. There's videos of her on YouTube. I have a video of her on my YouTube channel. All of this is in the video. My interview with Talia is in that video on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Timothy Alberino. So you'll see we went in with GoPros. We recorded much of what I'm saying. We recorded the interviews. We recorded the village receiving us, even the dance, the Kitu, traditional dance and all of that. So Talia's story was very harrowing. As I said, she was very distraught, very traumatized. She's the only one who described these guys speaking at all. Now, having said that, because she's so traumatized and because they shot narcotics up her nose, I'm not 100% convinced that she actually heard them speaking. A couple of things are possible here. There's really 3 possibilities. A, she did hear them speaking, and if in fact she did, and one was speaking broken Spanish and the other fluent Spanish, we're dealing with human beings. Or perhaps something a little more interesting. But we're dealing with human beings, some sort of human, perhaps human hybrid. Who knows? That's rank speculation. Probably dealing with human beings. That's one possibility. And I would say it's the strongest possibility. However, she may have been hearing these voices telepathically, not audibly. That's another possibility. And then there's a third possibility, and that is that she did not actually hear the voices. She confabulated the voices. Remember, she's under the influence of some sort of a narcotic here, and she's very traumatized. So her brain may be filling in the gaps of the events that she can't recall. And so she's confabulating voices when in fact they weren't speaking. Why do I say that? Because out of everybody I talked to, she's the only one who heard them speaking. The guys that shot these assailants point blank range, the assailants didn't even scream or yell out when they were hit. They weren't communicating on radios or anything like that. They never said anything. So Talia's encounter, albeit she had the most direct close encounter, right, with these assailants, it is an anomaly in that she heard these guys speaking. Her father took her to a medical post in a different village down the river where they had a better facility. They treated her wounds and they diagnosed her with severe PTSD. Wow. He showed me the paperwork and they suggested that they take her to a psychiatrist in Iquitos, which I facilitated that to happen. So during this period of time, there was a young man who was discovered in one of the villages or near one of the villages in a very gruesome condition. 2/3 of his face were gone. And it appears, if you watch the video, again, this video is on my YouTube channel. Doug and I did an analysis of this before we went down there. I just jumped on the phone with Doug and said, hey, have you seen this? And we started talking, and I said, hey, let's turn the cameras on and record a Zoom video here. And we just sort of analyzed these videos that were coming out of the jungle, that were coming out of San Antonio, the Pinu, Yaku, and Nauta, some of the other ones. And in the course of our discussion, we also analyzed another video that we weren't sure if it was related with these other incidents, but it was this young man whose face had been, for all intents and purposes, peeled. It had been peeled. And it was very apparently cut with some sort of precision instrument. It was not depredation by predators. It was not the work of piranhas. Piranhas nick the bone. It's very messy. Yes, they can strip you to the bone. There's no question about it. But it's not a clean surgical cut. It was a very clean surgical cut around the face. 2/3 of the face were gone. You can see around the neck. It was very surgical. Okay, this was not piranhas. It's very much like a cattle mutilation, and I wasn't sure. The video was unclear where it had occurred. Now, I'm one of the only guys on the internet who has that video still. It's inside of this other video, this analysis of all of these events previous to going to investigate myself. And that video went viral that I did. It nearly got 1 million views, and then YouTube age restricted it because of this video I featured in there of this young man whose face was peeled. That was previous to my own visit to the village. So while I was in the village, I asked him about that incident. And I said, was that related to the face peeler phenomenon? And they said, yes, and it happened not far. It happened in the same region of the jungle. I have not been able to independently verify that, but there were other incidents, other attacks. One of the villagers told me that his mom and dad live in a different village on a different river, sort of parallel to the Pinu Yaku, different part of the jungle, in the same region of the jungle, but a different river. They've been attacked. People there were hit with lasers. Okay, I spoke recently with a young man named Pablo Bardales in a village outside of the city of Yurimaguas. Yurimaguas is between Tarapoto and Iquitos, so it's in the Peruvian Amazon, right? But it's southeast, rather southwest. It's southwest of Iquitos, so it's closer to the Andes Mountains. It's in the high jungle, what's called the high jungle region of the Amazon. Actually, it's not yet the high jungle. Tarapoto's in the high jungle. Yurimaguas is in between the high jungle and like where the Amazon begins in Iquitos. So we're still within the same Peruvian Amazon basin, right? I spoke on the phone with this individual a week ago. They have a farmstead, as I said, outside of the city of Yurimaguas, in the jungle. And they experienced the very same phenomenon. These individuals came into their village, into their farmstead. They dressed in black armored bodysuits, same deal, helmets. They were floating on discs. By the way, they have backpacks on as well. But they seem to be hard shell backpacks, and we hypothesize that those are battery packs or perhaps small reactors. Probably the fuel source for this propulsion technology on their shoes and also the discs. Talia told me that when they mount the discs, they press a button on their boots that causes the discs to lift up into the air. So I think the technology that the battery packs they're carrying on their backs, or whatever it is, a reactor, whatever it is, and that the power source is going through their boots. That's why I think they snap into the platforms, and then they can energize the platforms and take off, right? So these individuals invaded this farmstead near Yurimaguas. It was the same sort of phenomenon. The men shot at them. One individual, Pablo, the guy I talked to, he was coming back from bathing in the river. He had a towel on. People are starting to shout. He grabs a shotgun. He sees these assailants. He chases them into the jungle. He's pursuing them in the jungle, and he fires his shotgun. They only got a couple of shotgun shells. These guys are not carrying a bunch of ammunition. So he fires his shotgun. That's the only shell he had, right? So then he throws the shotgun on the ground and runs up to the guy, because apparently he was able to damage the technology. The guy was having a hard time lifting off into the air. And it wasn't clear. It sounds like he was just using the discs on the bottom of his shoes trying to lift off into the air, right? Apparently Pablo damaged the technology because he was able to run up to him, and he actually grabbed him by the waist as he's lifting off into the air. So he's got the guy by the waist, And this assailant, this face peeler, pulls out some sort of a device, which apparently it's a laser. It's like he says it's like a little flashlight, but he said it's some sort of a laser, Pablo told me. Takes out this laser and hits Pablo with the laser as he's grabbing him, right? Pablo is immediately rendered unconscious. As soon as he's hit with the laser, he drops to the ground, unconscious. His buddy showed up later and woke him up and took him back to his house. And subsequently, Pablo developed a heart condition after being hit with this laser. So it had lasting damage. But whatever it was, it wasn't like a taser. It was light. So there wasn't like a wire connected to it. He was just hit with this laser light, falls to the ground unconscious. And the assailants escape. So I would guess that the deep elements of our military have the black elements of our military have this kind of technology. So, and he told me the same thing. They were on discs, so the circular platforms, these hoverboard platforms. So they came into the village in the same manner as the assailants in San Antonio de Pinto Yaku. And this occurred after San Antonio de Pinto Yaku. Okay, so maybe it's the same guys that migrated to a different part of the jungle, right? Let me add another level of mystique into this situation. Apart from the circular platforms, the circular hoverboards that are silent, and it's not propellers, it's not the same kind of hoverboard technology you see on the internet. And I don't even think it's just an upgraded version of that. I think we're dealing with a completely different kind of propulsion system here because they're silent. Now, they do make some sort of a noise. The villagers described it like as a compressed air sound when they take off. It does not appear that we're dealing with propellers. And what I'm about to tell you sort of solidifies that notion. Aside from that technology, right, the assailants are also apparently in possession of advanced aerospace vehicles. Several of the villagers drew these vehicles in the dirt, and one of them drew it on an acrylic board for me, which is in my video. They're described as rather large, about the size of a large helicopter like a Chinook or Black Hawk, the same size as the thing I saw in Brook Park, Ohio. So they're about the size of a small jet, let's say, like a private jet, right? They are acorn-shaped, not bell-shaped, not vertically acorn-shaped, rather like an acorn on its side, right? So they have that, they're acorn-shaped in that the back is wider, and they sort of come to a point in the front. So the back is wider, and then it's sort of rounded. They're not triangles. They hover in the sky. They have just like what I saw in Brook Park, Ohio, they have these rounded protrusions like nubs on the side. They do not have wings. Wow. One individual, the guy that drew me a picture of it on the acrylic board, this individual encountered the craft at nighttime, 3 o'clock in the morning. He was pulling up his nets from the river. He's in his canoe. He's pulling up the nets. And suddenly, it was pitch black. He said, suddenly it was like it was day, like the sun came up, like someone turned the lights on. He said, all of a sudden, I could see everything bright as day. And he noticed this light reflecting off the water. So he looks up, and what does he see? 30, 40 feet above him, he sees this craft, acorn-shaped, little nubs for wings, didn't have wings, just little rounded protrusions. And he said it was transparent. It had some sort of a transparent mesh around it. He could see into the craft. He saw 2 people inside. One was sitting sort of in the cockpit, and the other was in the middle, positioned in the middle. But he could see them. He's looking straight up at it. So the diagram he draws me is from his perspective in the canoe looking directly up at it. It had a light flashing down at him. He said that he watched as these little nubs on the side, they opened up. So they opened up and they deployed a series of rapidly blinking lights as if it was scanning. And it was there for an extended period of time. And he got a really good look at this thing. He described it to me in great detail, drew it on the acrylic board. And then he said the lights folded back in and it began to move away. And when it did that, it made a humming sound, like a low resonance hum. Other than that, it was totally silent. And it was capable of hovering hovering there without any visible propulsion system. I asked him, I said, did it have any propulsion? He said, no, there were no propellers, there were no engines, there was no sound until it began to move. Now, it's important to understand that the village of San Antonio de Pinto, Yaku, has a government communications outpost. The provincial government established a communications outpost there because this is in the middle of nowhere. It's one of the last villages, and it's just a vast wilderness, right, north of this village. The Amazon jungle just goes on. It goes all the way up to Ecuador and Colombia, and it's uninhabited jungle, Amazon jungle. So because they have a communications outpost, they have a building called the Tambo, and it's this sort of big meeting building. The provincial government owns it, but the villagers they can use it, right? And this building has internet, satellite uplink for internet, right? So why am I saying that? Because all these villagers, they watch movies on their phones. They go to the Tambo, they sit there, and they're on social media, they watch movies. These are not ignorant people. They know what airplanes are, they know what helicopters are. The military helicopters sometimes will come and fly around the area because they're looking for drug traffickers, or looking for illegal lumberjacks and so forth. These are civilized villagers, right? They're, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they were still wearing their grass skirts and blowguns and stuff like that, but maybe 50 years ago. But today, these are very intelligent people. They watch the same movies you and I watch. They watch the Marvel movies. They're very well versed in pop culture. So they know about helicopters and propulsion and jet engines. These aren't stupid people. They're very much aware of the modern world, okay? And the reason why I say that is because you have to understand that when these people are telling me about these advanced aerospace vehicles that they've encountered hovering, many of the villagers have encountered these things hovering above their village silently. They know it's not a helicopter. They know it's not an airplane. Okay, they don't know what it is, but they know enough to know that it's not that. No propellers, no propulsion system, no noise until they move away, and then they make that low frequency hum. Okay, so we're dealing with some sort of unconventional propulsion system, perhaps reverse engineered alien technology, perhaps at the very least it's unconventional, unacknowledged technology that somebody somewhere out there is in possession of. That's important to understand within the context of these assailants, because the discs, the hoverboard platforms seem to be deploying some sort of anti-grav technology, anti-gravitic, or at least electromagnetic or electrogravitic technology that is way beyond the propellered hoverboards that people can pull up on YouTube. We have some remarkable propeller hoverboard technology now that you can move at high rates of speed. They're very state-of-the-art, but they make a lot of noise, number one. And number two, it doesn't explain all the other technological stuff involved in these encounters that really are indicating a higher level of technology, a different kind of unconventional technology in play here. So, what are we dealing with here? Who are these assailants? Number one, let's keep in mind that nobody saw their faces. Even Talia, who was lifting up the mask, did not lift it up far enough to see the face. Nobody has seen the faces of these assailants. The only one who's heard them speak is Talia. They did attempt to cut her face off. So it's important to establish that the villagers believe that these are the legendary Pelacaras, face peelers. The Pelacara phenomenon is decades old, all right? It's not ancient, but it definitely goes back to the 80s, at least. And I don't believe it goes further than the 80s. I believe it began in the 80s. Pelacara means face peeler. The jungle, the Amazon jungle, has always been a hotspot for UFO activity, always. The Pelacara, the legend of the Pelacaras, as I said, probably goes back to the 80s, mid-80s. And I heard about it when I lived in the jungle. So it's like the boogeyman, right? Be careful, don't go out in the jungle alone at night because the face peeler might get you. Who are the face peelers? According to the indigenous communities, the face peelers are one of two things, and you hear these two views 50-50 from the villagers. They're either A, gringos with advanced technology, that's what they'll tell you, the villagers, or B, they're non-humans, they're extraterrestrial or some non-human faction. Okay? Some of the villagers think there might be a mix of the two things going on. There's no consensus. Some believe they're nefarious human beings with advanced technology. Some believe they're extraterrestrial. They're absolutely real. There's no question about that. So this is a phenomenon that's been going on for some decades. So the villagers, if you went to San Antonio de Pinto Yaku and you said, what's been happening? Who has been assaulting you? They will tell you, Pelacaras. Pistaco is another word that they use for them. Pelacaras have been attacking us. The face peelers have been attacking us. Okay. So, and I think, I mean, you can't argue with that analysis because they did indeed try to apparently cut the face off of Talia, this 15-year-old girl. So, who are the face peelers? There's a series of possibilities here. First of all, nobody knows. I don't know. The villagers don't know. They are perhaps human beings, nefarious human beings with advanced technology. I can tell you something for sure, okay? I can tell you this for sure. They're not river miners with jetpacks. That I can guarantee you they're not river miners with jetpacks. The villagers were offended by that concocted, fabricated story that those police officers came away with after doing their investigation and that the media ran with. They're offended by the notion that what they're experiencing can be explained by river miners with jetpacks. That's off the table. That's not what's happening. And we also know that these individuals are not, these assailants are not trying to drive them off their land. I'll tell you why in a minute. So we're dealing with perhaps nefarious human beings who are in possession of highly classified, unconventional technology. Okay? That is a distinct possibility, and that is the hypothesis that I believe is most plausible. Okay, that's the one I subscribe to. I think we are dealing with a nefarious human beings, possibly working with non-human entities, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We'll shelve that for a minute. Or you're dealing with some sort of non-human phenomenon here, including the possibility of reptilians. Why do I say that? Because of the size and the apparent... By the way, the agility of these guys is... the way it's explained to me in the village... And keep in mind, they could be exaggerating, all right? Now, I am 100% convinced that they are experiencing what they're saying they're experiencing, but there might be some confabulation and exaggeration. There most certainly is. So I was told that these people, these assailants, are exceedingly agile and fast, and their capabilities appear to be non-human, just in terms of their agility. Okay. Now, whether or not that's true, or whether that's a function of the technological apparatuses on their boots, I don't know. I can't say. They could be wearing exoskeleton suits. That's a possibility. They may have some sort of technology built into these armored body suits that enable them to be superhumanly agile, or at least enhance their capabilities in terms of their agility. But that was stressed to me. These guys do not move like normal human beings. So that's why I interject this wild speculation that maybe we're dealing with non-human or perhaps even reptilian-type entities. That is rank speculation. I don't have any reason to believe that that's the case over and against the other hypothesis, which is that these are just human beings, nefarious human beings in possession of advanced technology. Both of those possibilities are in play, and by the way, the villagers are divided on this. Some think they're just humans, organ harvesters, human traffickers. Others think they're aliens. I also know that we're not dealing with the cartels. And the reason why I know we're not dealing with the cartels is the level of technology that's being deployed here is beyond anything that cartels have. Cartels have military-grade weapons, no question about it, right? They don't have fighter jets. They don't have fighter jets, right? And so if they don't have fighter jets, and if they don't have some of the other, they don't have battleships, right? If they don't have some of these other technological armaments, they're not going to have advanced aerospace vehicles that can hover silently and have all the technological capabilities of conventional UFOs. They don't have that. So we're not dealing with miners, river miners, and we're not dealing with cartels. All right, this is something worse. Especially if it's human, this is something way worse than a cartel. This is like an international group, a breakaway civilization of very evil people in possession of remarkable technology. Which again, that's my hypothesis. Now, I told you, apart from the event that happened in San Antonio, the Pinu Yaku, regarding the face peeler incident, there was another event that was very interesting to me. I featured it in the videos I published previous to my expedition, in which this potential being is captured on video, right? That happened in the city of Nauta. We need to understand the context of the city of Nauta. When we talk about San Antonio de Pinu Yaku, we are talking about a remote village in which the villagers are armed with shotguns, 16-gauge shotguns, usually birdshot. So the resistance that village can mount against these assailants is not very good. It's perhaps, conventional body armor is good enough to deal with what those with the armaments in that village, right? Okay, not so in Nauta. All right, when you talk about Nauta, Nauta is the only place you can get to by road from Iquitos. It's a 2-hour drive from Iquitos, or an hour and a half, somewhere in there. And Nauta has a military base. Okay, now you got helicopters. Now you got automatic weapons. The police in Nauta have automatic weapons. All right, we're talking about a different scenario now. We're not talking about a remote village with just shotguns held together by rope, which is what you have out there. Now you're dealing with much more. Now you're dealing with much more formidable weapons. Even helicopters can be deployed in Nauta. Navy base, Army base, well-equipped police force. It changes everything. Now we know that these assailants are not trying to drive people off their land. Nauta has a population of 35,000. There are 35,000 inhabitants in Nauta. Nobody's going to drive those people off the land. All right? So we can now remove that from the equation. Now we can say definitively, understanding that this phenomenon was also happening in Nauta and is also happening in Nauta, and I heard rumor that they were experiencing the same phenomenon on the outskirts of Iquitos, which is much bigger than Nauta. We now know we're not dealing with drug traffickers, miners, and they're not trying to drive anybody off of their land. Okay, we can put that to bed. All right, we're dealing with something else here. So I went to Nauta to investigate that scenario that unfolded, that video in which it appears that we might be looking at an entity in the tree. I found the location. So I was able to see the location, to analyze the location during the day. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get an idea of what it looked like during the day so I can kind of understand maybe what we're looking at, the scale and so forth. You'll see that in my video. We record the location in the day, and I interview the neighbors who were there. Now, having said that, let me say that I do believe that the people I interviewed may have been referencing a different encounter than the one that I wanted to specifically investigate, because several encounters have taken place in that location. The one that the neighbor saw, it was the right spot. I was there. No, you'll see it in the video. No question about it. I found it. All right.
How did you find it?
We were able to, when we got to Nauta, we spoke with some people who were familiar with the video and put us in the general area, and then we sort of just walked around until we found it. We saw it. And then I talked to the neighbors, and they confirmed that this was, in fact, we showed them the video. The witnesses that I spoke to, who live right there, what they saw, the way that this incident began, was they saw a saucer, a flying disc, hovering above this tree, this large aguaje tree. which is kind of back in the background. See, in the video, because it's nighttime, you can't get an idea of perspective. But when you go there in the day, you realize that you're looking at this large aguaje tree, and whatever it is that they were training their flashlight on is up in that tree or in the tree next to it, and it's not right above the house as it appears in the video. It's further back. Okay, so now we can start to have an idea of scale. So the witnesses told me they saw like a saucer. She drew it in the dirt, and it looks like a saucer. Well, what they explained, what they described, like a flying saucer hovering over this tree, and it was projecting a light down into the tree. Okay, that's one incident. But I don't think that was the incident that correlates directly to the video. I think that was a different incident that occurred in the same exact location. Now, when you analyze the video, and for those who are wondering about this, go to my YouTube channel, Timothy Alberino, watch my videos on this. You'll see what I said. Specifically the video, the after action report of the expedition, which has about 160,000 views right now. You will see the videos in question here. You'll understand what I'm saying. So I was able to deduce right away, based on being able to calculate the distance of this tree from the rooftop in this video, I was able to deduce that if in fact what we're looking at in this video is an entity, it's very large. It would have had to have been very. We're talking about 7.5 to 9 foot tall, with a huge head. Now, for those of you who are wondering what this video depicted, it appears that we're looking at an entity that has that typical gray alien type, elongated, large, almond-shaped black eyes, more like a mantis or mantoid or insectoid type being. Looks like more like a praying mantis. And you can even see in the video, it appears that this thing is moving its head side to side, and you can see the glare off of its eyes, the eye shine from the flashlight. Maybe it's just artifacts in the video. Maybe it's just because it's super low res and it's reflections of the light off the. I don't know. I'm not saying that it is an entity. I'm saying it might be, but based on my analysis of the location during the day, it would have to be exceedingly large. Again, 7.5 to 9 foot tall. The head would have had to have been like that big. Okay, we're talking about a massive entity, if indeed it is a creature. The neighbors told me they didn't see what I apparently see in the video. In fact, when I showed them the video, unquestionably in the same location, when I showed them the video, it was like they were seeing it for the first time. Like, what's that? Right? What they saw was very clearly a craft, a disc that was hovering over that tree, projecting a light down. So I think we're dealing with two different incidents. The neighbors I spoke with didn't see the incident, the one I was referring to. Maybe that's the case. Okay, I was certainly in the right place, and certainly something had happened there on multiple occasions. And according to the neighbors, they saw a flying disc. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the particular woman I talked to a bunch of them, but the woman who lives across the street, she said that after they saw this disc and this light projecting, another one of her neighbors came walking down the street. He had a shotgun with him, and she had heard that same night gunshots ringing out in the air. That night she heard gunshots on the outskirts of town. So when he came walking with his gun, she asked him, "Hey, were you out there? Were you patrolling? Did you hear the gunshots?" And he said, "Yeah, I was one of the ones firing the guns." She said, "Well, what happened?" Guess what happened? They were encountering assailants dressed in black armored bodysuits, flying around on these circular hoverboard platforms, the exact same phenomenon that had occurred 2 days up the river in San Antonio de Pinto, Yaku. Same phenomenon, same dudes. But now we got this added element of a disc, a flying disc, your typical saucer, right? Flying saucer, and a potential mantis, insectoid type creature. Huge, okay? Potential, mind you. I'm not saying that that's what it was for sure. So, and we have to remember, this is now not taking place in some remote village. This is now taking place in a city, jungle city, 35,000 inhabitants, Police have automatic weapons. The military has automatic weapons. They can deploy helicopters. Okay? That's the context of this encounter. And it happened multiple times. Not far from Nauta, there was a big story that broke in Nauta before I got there. It was of this young boy who was in the hospital. He almost died. This boy had the same kind of lacerations as Talia, except they were way worse on both sides. They looked like gills were cut into the side of his neck. You can see it in a video on my YouTube channel. The flesh is hanging there, bleeding profusely. That boy almost died. He's about 16 years old, maybe 14 years old, somewhere in there, maybe 15 like Talia. He was rushed to the hospital, and thank God they were able to give him some blood and sew him up and save his life. It's very graphic, okay? I actually tweeted that video. And according to the inhabitants of Nauta, he was attacked by a pelacara, by a face peeler. And the boy apparently described the same kind of assailants as Talia and San Antonio. Flying on the hoverboards, dressed in black, the whole deal, right? And they cut him open like a fish, and apparently he was rescued, and something happened to disrupt the attempted abduction. And now we have to contemplate, all right, are they actually the face peelers, or are they mimicking face peelers? Because something very strange is going on here. You have these attempted peelings of the face that do not succeed for whatever reason. It seems like these guys are pretty incompetent at peeling faces, right? I get the sense that that's not actually what they're there to do. That they're perhaps they're using the face peeler phenomenon as cover for some other nefarious operation that's going on in the Amazon. So they want the focus to be on the legend and not on what's actually taking place. You see what I'm saying? So it's like a cover operation. I don't know that that's true, but I suspect that may be true, because if they were really there to peel faces, man, they'd be peeling faces and getting away without the victims, at least in 2 occasions, being found, with the unsuccessful attempt and basically being caught in the red-handed as they're attempting to cut these faces off. So that doesn't seem very plausible to me that these guys have only made a few attempts. They've been caught a couple of times. That doesn't seem very plausible. With all the technology they have, certainly they have night vision goggles. By the way, they can render these guys in unconscious, remember, with these lasers. So why? Unless we're talking about a here and they want to induce the terror first and then take the glands. It's kids and the blood. They want all of that pumped with the. I guess that's possible. Anything's possible. But it is interesting that this face peeler attack happened previous to my investigating this other incident in Nauta. So again, let me summarize. We don't know who we're dealing with or what we're dealing with precisely. The phenomenon is 100% real. It is physical. It's not supernatural. It's not paranormal. It's physical. It's technological. I'm leaning towards nefarious human beings with advanced technology. I'm not ruling out non-human involvement. Could be a mix of both. They're definitely, at least ostensibly, they're cutting faces, peeling faces, and they also have advanced aerospace vehicles. So all of that is true. Okay, all of that is in the mix of whatever the heck is going on. All of that must be contemplated when thinking about what's been unfolding in the Peruvian Amazon. It is ongoing, by the way. Other incidents have happened around Tarapoto. I have land in the jungle in Tarapoto, so this was like close to home to me. Tarapoto's a second home for me and my family. So that's one of the motivations I had in investigating this phenomenon. I have 20 acres up against the Rainforest Reserve outside of Tarapoto, Peru. So for all I know, these guys have been flying around my land. So it's kind of personal for me. Because we're dealing with advanced technology, there's some crossover here for sure into the realm of ufology, because if it is human beings with advanced technology, I would posit that this technology, at least to some extent, has been derived from alien technology, from non-human technology. So there is certainly crossover here with traditional ufology, but this could be something more. This could be something more nefarious than anything else we've ever encountered in ufology. In an alien abduction, the Greys are using the wombs of our females to progenerate their hybrid offspring, which is nefarious. They're abducting people against their will, subjecting them to all kinds of invasive procedures. That's nefarious. This is nefarious on a whole nother level. Being an abductee, if you're an abductee, an alien abductee, they're going to put you back, right? And your life is going to progress relatively undisturbed, despite the fact that you're an abductee. This face peeler phenomenon is much more hostile. This is a hostile aggression against defenseless communities, or at the very least, defenseless individuals like these adolescents who are being assaulted and subjected to a gruesome procedure in which these assailants are apparently attempting to cut their face off while they're still alive. Okay, so, and for what reason? And apparently they're doing this with advanced tech. This scenario meshes very well with the story that was told by the whistleblower that Dr. Greer brought forth in the last couple of years. I believe his name is Michael Herrera, who discusses that incident in Indonesia with the flying disc that he encountered, and it was paramilitary, obviously being conducted by human beings who were in possession of advanced technology. That's the vein that this falls into, from my perspective, and it's exceedingly disturbing to imagine a group of human beings who are in possession of advanced technology and not using it for the betterment of mankind. Rather, they're going around and basically harvesting human beings for organs, taking their faces, maybe because of the glands in the who knows. That is like the worst possible scenario, and it appears to be the one that's unfolding here. So this is almost like a whole nother level of mystery on top of what we already know in the realm of ufology. This is much darker and sinister than anything else I've ever encountered, and it is, as I said, it's ongoing. This isn't something that happened 20 years ago. This is something that's ongoing in the Peruvian Amazon. So that's why I'm so intensely interested in, and I think the public at large is so intensely interested in this, because it's ongoing and because it has these very disturbing components to it that once again seem to be indicating, at least to some extent, human involvement.
An encounter of the first kind. That's when you see a UFO.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
The only people who have time to do that are UFO freaks like moi living in trailer parks.
Sir, I think you need to go on TV and convince the people that there is no such thing as a UFO.
I think that because we are a telepathic race, well, we can't function, we can't utilize this functionality anymore because of genetic degeneration or because of an intentional dampening of this capability. So if you have a telepathic race out there and you are thinking about stuff and you're contemplating, well, they're connecting to that. And I believe that, by the way, the Greys are looking for people who have a heightened capability. Let's call it a psychic capability, whose psychic faculties, and I'm not talking about seances and stuff like that. I'm just talking about our ability to project our thoughts, perhaps a latent telepathic capability that is more awakened in some people. The Greys are looking for those kind of people. They're actively looking for them. In fact, they use psychics, your neighborhood psychic. I derive that from the abduction material. It's become evident to me that is in fact the case. So why would they be looking for people who are less psychically broken, let's say, who still retain some of these latent capabilities, at least to a higher degree than the rest of us? Because the control of the Greys over human beings is a psychic control. And so if you're more inclined to this, predisposed to these capabilities, then you are easier to control and to communicate with. And I think I believe it's genetic. I believe that's why it's hereditary in regard to abductions. And so there's a presence out there that's actively looking for people who are predisposed to that kind of communication, to that kind of contact and control via this alien presence. And again, I have reason to believe that. I believe it appears that is one of the factors that the Greys in particular are looking for in the human species. And again, you can go to the abduction material, specifically the work of Carla Turner, and you will see what I mean, especially as it relates to the story of one Ted Rice in a book called Masquerade of Angels. Carla Turner was harassed. Her and her family were aggressively harassed by some sort of agency, perhaps a defense contractor or some branch of the military. There's no question that the Turner family was being harassed. Both Carla and her husband and their children were abductees. Her husband actually suffered a handful of military abductions, which were worse, by the way, than the alien abductions. And very strange things happened to the Turner family. Carla, for example, would be on the phone talking to a friend of hers, and this is back before cell phones. It's back in the dial-up days and the hardline days, and her conversation would be interrupted by a third party who would make a comment or something. It was her continual harassment, and then she was one of the first and most vocal people to speak up about the abduction phenomenon. And Carla was brilliant, and unfortunately, she was stricken with a very, very aggressive, fast-acting cancer that killed her in a short period of time. And there's the suspicion that she was killed, that she was murdered with cancer, basically. No way to prove that, but she was certainly harassed. The Turner family was certainly harassed, and I think people need to return to Carla Turner's work because it's very relevant to things that are happening today, and her material, I think, is just exceedingly well researched. And again, I think she was brilliant. In my estimation, now, I don't know all that's happening out there in the world of ufology, but there was a quality, and I've spoken to my colleagues about this who absolutely agree. Again, I had this conversation with Richard Dolan the other day. There is a clear discrepancy between modern ufology and old school ufology, and that discrepancy is in regard to the quality of the research. The old researchers like Leonard Stringfield, Bud Hopkins, these guys, these old school guys, Carla Turner, David Jacobs, John Mack, these guys were professionals. They had a very high standard in regard to their methods. They were old school investigators. George Knapp is one of these guys. George Knapp is still around. He's one of these old school investigators who I have a great deal of respect for, who would chase down stories, who would do the legwork. That was old school ufology. They took it very serious. They were very concerned with evidence, evidence-based research, and they had a standard of professionalism that I admire and I think is lacking in ufology today. Ufology today is UFO Twitter. Ufology today is speaking at conferences, watching YouTube videos, making YouTube videos. Modern ufology is not what it was. These guys, a lot of these old school guys, paid the price in many ways for their investigations. More than a few investigators were killed by the military contractors or by elements of the United States government. And so the quality of these old school ufologists, the quality of their investigations and of their research, in my opinion, was on a higher level than what we're seeing today. The research that's out there today is diminished in regard to, I think, in regard to its methods, and it's become very easy to be lazy in ufology. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, ufologists were not famous people for the most part. They weren't making a lot of money. They weren't going around speaking to big conferences. They weren't on Ancient Aliens. There were no TV shows. Very rarely. Sometimes Bud Hopkins, these other guys, would go on television shows, but it was ridiculed. They were exposing themselves to ridicule. People rolled their eyes at the topic of UFOs. It wasn't like it is today. It wasn't creating celebrities. It wasn't a topic that everybody is interested in. Back then, you were a kook. If you were a ufologist, if you took this seriously, you were a kook. So guys like Stanton Friedman, and even though he was a nuclear physicist, and even guys like him were considered to be kooky because they believed in UFOs. And these were brilliant guys. These were top-notch ufologists, investigators. And there was nothing in it for them. I mean, they would write books. Sometimes their books would become very popular, like Whitney Strieber's book, Communion, and so forth. But for the most part, UFO conferences were very small. The UFO community was not what it is today.
It was taboo.
There was no social media. Ancient Aliens didn't exist. So it was a different world. The researchers were heavily invested in the topic because they were genuinely curious. They wanted to solve the puzzle, or they had some sort of an experience in their life, like Carla Turner, previously mentioned Carla Turner, that compelled them to try and figure out what was happening. And unfortunately, that caliber of research isn't around today anymore. You have great UFO historians like Richard Dolan, who I would put in the company of these old school researchers. Yeah, they're still doing great work. I mentioned George Knapp, Richard Dolan, George Knapp. There's still guys out there. To some extent, I would say Dr. Guerrero. There's some guys out there that are doing the kind of research that is to the level of the caliber that the old guys were, the old school guys, and I appreciate their work. But most of it is UFO Twitter. Most of it's hearsay. Most of it's just social media fanfare. It's become too popular. It's become too mainstream. There's too many YouTube channels. There's too many podcasts. There's too many people on Twitter and social media who are muddying the waters because their information just comes from watching videos, watching YouTube. Mainly, I would say that's where the vast majority of the information comes from. And so they're not first-hand researchers. They're not investigative researchers. They're not on the ground. They're not doing the work that, for example, MUFON used to do and still does to some extent. And so you get the waters get muddied with lower caliber research, and it's a lot of hearsay. It's a lot of rumor. And the UFO community is there's a hostility there. There's an animosity. Everybody's on a team. And I get, for example, a lot of people who are on Team Greer who come and lambast me, because I'm not acknowledging Greer when I say certain things. And I get people coming from different camps. and it's very strange. It's become very tribalistic. The ufological community, that's why I kind of stay on the outside of it. I don't speak at the symposiums. I don't go to the big UFO conferences. I'm sort of an outsider because it's very toxic. It's a toxic environment. And I'm very careful the kind of people who I associate with in this community. I make sure that the people that I'm drawing information from are the old school caliber researchers like Chase Kletsky, Richard Dolan, George Knapp, these kind of people. This is the research. Their research, Stringfield's research, for example, Leonard Stringfield's research, is just as relevant, if not even more relevant today than it was. His Situation Reports series, which almost exclusively deal with crash retrievals, has never been. No one has ever produced a better material on crash retrievals. Stringfield's work is the foundation for understanding what's happening today in regard to David Grush, the testimony that's come forth in Congress, everything that's been going on recently. The foundation was laid by Leonard Stringfield, right? And the same can be said for the abduction stuff, hasn't raised to the level of Congress yet, isn't being featured yet very much by the media, but it will, ultimately, it will. And when it does, it's important for people to go back to the foundations, the intellectual foundations, the good research, which is Mack and Hopkins and Turner and Jacobs. I respect any ufologist whose investigations are furthering disclosure. Any ufologist who's uncovering material, either in the field or documents, and who are bringing forth viable witnesses, verifiable witnesses who are adding to this effort, this push for disclosure. I respect those researchers, and I don't have to agree with everything they say or everything they think, but I respect the effort and I commend the effort. And there are a handful of guys out there who have been very instrumental in all of this, and I certainly applaud them. I don't have to agree with everything everybody says, and they don't have to agree with everything I say. But I think what we all want collectively is transparency. We want to end the secrecy because there's a lot of nefarious things happening behind the scenes. These defense contractors, these private contracting military contractors have been getting away with murder. I think quite literally for decades. And elements of the United States government, the so-called deep state, which I refer to as the dumb state, they've been doing things that are reprehensible, certainly at the very least, subverting the Constitution, subverting Congress. I had, after the hearings that took place in Congress, I had one of the congressmen on the committee called me and wanted to discuss the topic of UFOs with me. And so I've subsequently, I was able to do this briefing with some of the congressmen on the committee via Zoom one day, or via the internet, and I met personally with one of the congressmen, and I can tell you that the core group of guys in Congress, in the Congress committee, the House committee, are dedicated and are motivated, and these guys are sincere about getting to the bottom of this topic, about popping this cap of disclosure and revealing all of the mess that's inside of there, to their own peril. By the way, they fully understand what they're up against, and these guys know. And one of the congressmen told me that he had been, that he had been warned by somebody in the Trump administration who just sort of gave him a heads up and said, "Hey, man, watch out. You got guns in your house? Are you armed? Just watch your back, because, the intelligence community, elements of the military-industrial complex, defense contractors are not happy." The committee that's going on in the Senate that Gillibrand was heading is a dog and pony show. Okay, that's a dog and pony show. The committee that was formed in the House, the UAP committee in the House, that one's for real. Now, there are, I would say, a substantial group of congressmen and women who are a part of that committee who are in it for the TV time. But the core group who's behind this thing, who I've interfaced with, these are good men. These are sincere men. And they should have our full support, because it's not a psyop. It's for these guys, it's not about the TV time. They are genuinely concerned about this apparatus of secrecy that's been erected around this topic that has been deadly for some people, but certainly has subverted the American people, the Constitution and Congress, and needs to be reined in, and the information that they've been holding, at least much of it, perhaps not all of it, but much of it needs to be disclosed to the American people. These guys are tenacious. They're not going to stop. And I don't know how far they're going to get. They're already hitting the wall in a lot of ways. They're already being blocked and obfuscated. But I think they are making headway. I think they're, at the very least, they're creating an environment which is much more friendly and accommodating to whistleblowers, which is very helpful. So I commend these guys. And gals. Congressman Eric Burleson, Congressman Tim Burchett, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Congressman Matt Gaetz, and others who are at the forefront of this thing, I think, are doing a phenomenal job. So about 12 years ago, somewhere in there, I don't remember the exact time frame, it was when I was living in Cleveland, Ohio for a couple of years, and during this period of time, I was spending a lot of time with my brother-in-law, Tony, and we would often lift weights in his basement, and the topic of our conversations while we were lifting usually or very commonly revolved around UFOs, Bob Lazar, reverse engineered technology, all this kind of stuff. He's very mechanically inclined, and so we would often discuss anti-gravity and different aspects of perhaps technologies that we've derived through reverse engineering. And one day, I believe we were having a conversation like that. And one day, it was in February, it was very cold outside, we decided he wanted to go run to the GNC store to buy some supplements in Brook Park, Ohio, where I was born. I grew up in Brook Park, Ohio. And it's a suburb of Cleveland, 15-minute drive from where we were. So we jumped in the car, and we were driving to the Brook H shopping complex. It was a strip mall. And there's a big parking lot. And as we're approaching the parking lot, again, it's probably around 8 o'clock, because we're rushing to get to the store before it closes. So I don't remember what time it was. Probably closed at 9. So maybe it was 8:30, 8:45, approaching 9, I think. And as we're coming up to the parking lot, we were stopped at a light, and we both noticed some kind of a craft hovering above the corner store in the strip mall. And there's hardly anybody around at this point, because it's almost 9 o'clock. All the stores are closing. Only a couple of cars are in the parking lot. And our first inclination was that this is a Black Hawk helicopter or a Chinook helicopter, because that's the size of it. That was the size of it. And it had these bright lights. And it was just hovering above the corner store, not very high, like maybe 20 feet above that corner store. And there's a National Guard. A National Guard. What would you call it? The National Guard is close by. And so we thought, our initial inclination was, they're doing some kind of a drill. The National Guard's running a drill here. They got a Chinook helicopter or something. And, okay, whatever. We didn't think much of it, but we did roll our windows down because we thought for sure we were going to hear the blades whipping through the air. So we roll our windows down and we hear nothing. And when we hear nothing, we're stopped at the stoplight. We look at each other like, uh-oh, wait a minute. So I drive through the light and I enter the parking lot. I'm driving. I enter the parking lot and it's empty, this big parking lot. And I just hit the brakes and throw the transmission into park because it suddenly became apparent to us, as soon as we got close enough, that this wasn't a helicopter. And we're both looking at it as we're driving in, still expecting it to be a helicopter. And what happened was, as I'm driving into the parking lot, this craft, which is hovering above the corner store, gently glides. It just gently glides and starts to move over my car. So I throw it in park, and we're just looking up at this thing, and it maneuvers above and in front of my car so that I could get a full view of it in my windshield. I get a full view of this thing in my windshield. So it's not exactly above us, it's a little bit in front. Like almost as if it's intentionally positioning itself so that I can see the whole thing through my windshield. And then it begins to descend. It probably was about 30 feet above my car, 40 max. It was close. I could have easily hit it with a rock. And it just hovered there. And obviously, we now realize this is not a helicopter. We are in a state of shock. Our jaws are just on the floor as we're staring at this thing. And we're just staring at it in silence because it's astounding. I mean, it's astonishing because there was no propulsion system to speak of. No propellers, no exhaust, no engines. And again, this was the size of like a Black Hawk helicopter, but it wasn't shaped like a helicopter. It was shaped, it had sort of a diamond shape, and it didn't have wings. It had little stubby protrusions in the place of wings, and they were rounded. The craft had what appeared to be angular body armor, like a grayish green, or perhaps it was black. I couldn't really tell. And the fuselage was very interesting. It was somewhat similar to the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. Somewhat similar. Yeah, that angular body armor, but it didn't have wings. And it was longer. And we're just staring at this thing, and we got a good long look at it. And eventually I said, I kind of came out of a stupor, and as I'm looking at this, and I remember that my brother-in-law had a smartphone. I, at the time, still had a flip phone. He had a smartphone. And so obviously what comes to mind is take a picture, take a video. So I said, Tony, your phone. And he's just, like he's coming out of a daze, and he starts feeling for his phone. And he grabs his phone out of his pocket, and he goes to lift it up, and he drops it. And he's scrambling trying to pick it up, trying to find it, because it's dark in my car. He's scrambling to pick it up off the ground. And when he grabs it, he picks it up, and he lifts it up to take a picture or a video. And the craft just lifts up in the air a little bit and just starts to move off. As soon as he gets the phone, like as soon as he's starting to lift it up, the craft just starts to move off. By the way, it's very important to note that this particular night was very, very windy. It was so windy that when I parked my car, the gusts of wind were shaking the car. That's how windy it was. It was very frigid air, and it was just extremely windy. This craft was entirely unmoved by the wind. Unmoved. My car is shaking. This thing is totally still. Unmoved by the wind. Unaffected. As if it was in its own atmosphere. And that I remember just remarking, like, when we got out of the car, when it started to move away, we got out of the car and we watched this thing just move over the horizon. And it was so windy that the wind instantly hit our faces and cold, and we couldn't believe that this thing was not being affected whatsoever by these high winds. So it was obvious to us that we were looking at advanced technology. I don't know who was piloting it. I don't know why. I had this strange feeling that I was supposed to see this thing, that whatever intelligence was behind it was waiting for me, wanted me to see this craft. Now, keep in mind that the topic of our conversation, me and my brother-in-law, was often reverse engineered alien technology, UFOs, Bob Lazar, Element 115, the S4 facility, deep underground military bases. This was the usual fare in regard to our conversations. And we were just talking about this stuff at his house in his basement, lifting weights. Here we are heading to the GNC store, and what do we find? Apparently waiting for us, an advanced aerospace vehicle. I would say that the odds are very rare. I mean, are very slim that we would have such an encounter after talking about this kind of thing. So it was so bizarre. I couldn't shake this feeling like I was supposed to see this. Somebody wanted me to see this. Somebody wanted me to know that this is real. So when I talk about UFOs, when I talk about reverse engineered technology, I'm talking about something I've seen. I am a witness to advanced aerospace technology. No question about it. This is not the F-117 stealth fighter. This is a completely different kind of technology. It is unconventional technology. Now, was it ours? Maybe, probably. But I'm convinced that if it was ours, then it was using unconventional exotic components derived from probably crash retrievals. And we know that it's a fact at this point that the United States government and other governments of the world have recovered elements of the United States government with private defense contractors, have been recovering for decades crashed UFOs and their biological occupants. But I know what I saw, and it had large triangular lights, which was really bizarre. That I remember thinking, I've never seen a craft with triangular lights. They were bright lights, like white lights. I remember at least one. My brother-in-law remembers two. There were probably two. It had a series of multicolored lights. I believe green. I want to say green and blue. I don't believe there was any red. I think it was green and blue around the fuselage. It was lit up. But other than that, there were no markings on it. I remember I was tracing this thing with my eyes, looking for the U.S. Air Force logo or something like that, or NASA or something like that, and it didn't have any markings at all. There were no markings, no decals on it whatsoever. There's no question that this is unconventional advanced technology that the public is unaware of, and that is utilizing some kind of a propulsion system that is exotic. It is not using combustion of any kind. There is no exhaust. And by the way, no sound. Totally silent. It'll vibrate your windows if a fighter jet flies low enough. It vibrates the windows on your house. That's a different kind of technology. Yeah. This isn't just an upgraded version of that. This is a completely different technological path for propulsion. It's a completely different kind of propulsion. There's no question about it. I saw it with my own eyes. It was about 40 feet above my car. I got a good long look at it, and I had a witness next to me. And no, we weren't smoking crack. We were completely sober and absolutely astonished by what we had seen. Now, the story gets even weirder because fast forward 10 years, and I'm writing my book, Birthright, which I published in 2020. I'm in the midst of writing the chapter called The Alien Threat. I'm talking about gray aliens, abductions, and UFOs. And I am telling the story. It's in my book, the account of what I saw in Brook Park, Ohio. I'm writing the paragraph, the few paragraphs of this encounter, and I stop in the middle of it just to take a break. And what am I doing? During these little breaks I'm taking in between these writing sessions, I'm sitting in my reading chair reading Hunt for the Skinwalker by Knapp and Cale Heller. And I don't remember how far I am along in the book. I've just been casually reading it and then writing and then going back and reading and then writing just to give my brain a break from writing. And it just so happens that as I'm in the midst of writing this paragraph about the encounter I just described, I happened to read, I went and sat down, opened up the book, continued to read where I left off, and it just so happens at that very moment, I read an account in Hunt for the Skinwalker of the owner of the ranch who begins to describe this encounter he had with an advanced aerospace vehicle. And he proceeds to describe exactly what I saw. Exactly. Here's my computer next to me with the unfinished paragraph that I'm writing about my encounter, and here I am reading this account on Skinwalker Ranch of the very same craft that I saw. It's exactly the same. He describes it in precisely the same detail. And at the end of his description, he says that he had the uncanny, and I'm paraphrasing, the uncanny feeling that this was ours, reverse engineered military craft with unconventional components derived from alien technology. There's my paragraph, unfinished, on my screen, and here I am reading this in Hunt for the Skinwalker. I have never, ever, in all my years of investigating UFOs and reading different accounts and watching lectures and so forth, I've never encountered the craft that I saw in Brook Park. I've never encountered a description. Now, I'm sure they're out there. I talked to my friend Richard Dolan the other day, and he said he's heard some similar descriptions, but I personally had never encountered any. And, I mean, what are the odds that I'm writing it and I'm reading the exact same thing in the Hunt for the Skinwalker book? So apparently that same craft has been spotted at Skinwalker Ranch. It could have been completely coincidental. Certainly it could have been completely, both incidents could have been completely coincidental. And I'm not trying to say that that it wasn't more than a coincidence, although I am certainly open to the possibility that maybe it was providential. I would say providential certainly, but was somebody in the intelligence community or was somebody in one of these programs intentionally showing me something? Now, why would they show me something? I was unknown at that time. Not relatively unknown. I was unknown. It doesn't make sense. I was unknown. Nobody knew who I was at the time. I wasn't making videos. I wasn't making documentaries. I wasn't writing books yet when I had that encounter in Brook Park, Ohio. I had just moved back to the United States from living in Peru for a decade. I was unknown. Now, I was very interested in the topic and had been researching it heavily. But nobody knew who I was. So the whole thing is very bizarre. So providential, I would say certainly. Was it beyond that? Was it was there an intentionality behind it, from human or non-human intentionality behind it? I don't know. It solidified my belief, let's say, in UFOs. And when I say that, what I mean is that the craft are real, that they're physical, that it's technology, that and from my, even though I can't prove it to be so, from my perspective, that the U.S. government is in possession of exotic alien technology. That became solidified. I always believed it. It always seemed reasonable and logical. But when I had the encounter with this technology, it solidified. It became unquestionable. And so that's sort of been the foundation. That's why people, they sometimes accuse me of speaking arrogantly about the UFO topic or being overconfident. Well, it's because I've had a face-to-face experience with this technology. And it wasn't in a dream or a vision or an abduction or anything like that. I was sitting in my car, completely conscious. There was no missing time, by the way. I wasn't abducted or anything like that. It was a conscious experience, a physical experience. I had a witness. It happened. And it's simply, as I said, it concretized my belief in the phenomenon. Again, it's just almost like I'm supposed to understand that this is real and that my suspicion is correct, that we indeed have these hybridized, we have these hybridized craft, advanced aerospace vehicles that are utilizing exotic components from reverse engineered alien technology. It's real. I saw it. I had a witness, and nobody could ever convince me that these things don't exist. About 20 years ago, I was living in Tarapoto, Peru, and working with different churches in Tarapoto, and so we had groups that would come during the week, a couple times a week, and we would do these really intense prayer meetings. And right next to the Actual, this facility I was renting, is a detox center called Takiwasi. Very popular detox center, kind of famous. The owners, I believe, at the time were French. People would come from all over the world, and the idea was they would use shamanism and ayahuasca to detox people from different drug addictions. And so you would have a lot of foreigners coming in, and then they would work with shamans. And down the road from us, so we had Takiwasi right next door, and then down the road from us was another shamanic center, like a shamanic retreat. And our neighbors were shamans. Most of them were shamans. This is like the center for shamanism in the city of Tarapoto, the jungle city of Tarapoto. Some of my acquaintances in Tarapoto were shamans, and so I was very well known among that community. One day, I was approached. I had a gate in this facility, the Actual, and one day in the morning, I had a group of shamans knocking on my gate. I invited them in, and we sat down. They were very cordial, very nice guys. They were from Takiwasi. They politely asked me if we could conduct our prayer meetings on a different day. I believe it was a Thursday, one of the prayer meetings. We were doing them, I think, twice a week, like Thursday evening and maybe a Tuesday evening. And I asked them why. What was the reason why they wanted me to change the day of our prayer meeting, the evening? I assumed it was because we made a lot of noise, played music and drums and stuff like that. But that wasn't the reason. What he told me was, he said, the problem is that when you guys are praying, what we do at Takiwasi as shamans doesn't work. Like it affects the atmosphere, and it interferes with, let's call it, our magic. And that's not the word he used exactly, but I can't remember the exact phraseology. But it was, the idea was whatever you're doing is interfering with what we're doing, spiritually speaking, something along those lines. And I was quite amazed at how candid these guys were with me. They were very, very cordial, very kind. It was not an aggressive encounter. There was no animosity. They were just asking me, please, can you change your prayer meeting to a different night so that we can operate? And they're literally right next door. And we would sometimes hear these blood-curdling screams coming from the Takiwasi Center. And we would hear sometimes their ceremonies. Typical ayahuasca ceremonies they would do. I wasn't going to rearrange our schedule for our prayer meetings because it was interfering with the shamanism that was happening next door. So I politely declined, and there was no animosity. However, some weeks later, perhaps a couple months later, I woke up one morning. I'm trying to remember if it was a morning or an evening, but one day I had a mob with machetes and sticks at my gate. And they were demanding that I turn over one of the young guys that was staying with us. I was doing like some discipleship with some young guys, and they were demanding I turn him over and that I shut down our prayer meetings. They were going to hang him. They were going to take him and hang him from the bridge. They were accusing him of something, I don't remember what. And in Peru, you have what's called ronderos, and they're basically citizen police. It's they take justice into their own hands, and it's not uncommon for them to hang people. Previous to this occasion, they had hung a young man from the bridge. It's not uncommon for them to do this in Peru, and at that time at least. So I wasn't about to hand over this guy into this mob justice. I don't know if what they were claiming was true, but that wasn't for me to determine, or the mob. You know, if they had a complaint like that, then they need to go get the police involved. So, in fact, I got the police involved. I called the police, the Peruvian police, and said, hey, I got a mob at my gate. They're trying to break in. And the police eventually came and dispersed the mob. And this young man, he basically fled. And ultimately, after that event, we were getting all kinds of threats. In fact, very strange things were beginning to happen at the Actual, the place I was renting. For example, I was finding routinely venomous creatures in my room. I was staying in one of the rooms, a small room, and I had my wife and my newborn son. And I was routinely finding large tarantulas all over my door and venomous insects such as bullet ants. I remember one day I was laying in bed, just laying there watching TV, and my son was next to me. And I looked over, and he's a baby laying on the bed. And there was a bullet ant crawling around, I don't remember if it was on him, but it was crawling around on our bed sheets. A bullet ant. Now, if a bullet ant were to sting my son, my infant, he could very well have died. It would have been very, very bad. Bullet ants can kill dogs and infants. Very, very large ants. And, if they sting you or me, it just is going to hurt like hell for a couple days. Like, you're going to cry, probably. It's very bad pain. So, but to an infant, it can be fatal. And that was uncommon. That was the first time I ever found a bullet ant in my room. This is around the same time I'm finding tarantulas all over my doors. All over my, like I would, in the evening, I go to bed. I would come back from being out on the town and approach my room, and I would see big black tarantulas on my door, as if someone put it there. And then one morning, right in the same time frame, the same few days this was going on, my wife woke up one morning, and we had a concrete sink in the facility. Not in my room, but in the facility. And she would wash clothes in the morning. So one morning she got up to wash clothes. She went to turn the water on the sink, the handle, and there was a venomous snake coiled around the handle of the sink, coiled around it in a striking position. She almost reached to turn the water on and screamed. Now, snakes do not wrap themselves around a cold water handle in the morning. They're out sunning. They're cold-blooded, so they have to go and sun and warm up in the morning. Somebody put that snake there. My caretaker over the facility, his name is Guillermo. My wife screamed, and Guillermo came running and killed the snake. I wasn't there during that episode. And Guillermo wanted to talk to me. He sat down with me. He said, Tim, I want you to know that all this stuff going on that you're experiencing here, the snake and these venomous insects. This is the shamans. So this was sort of retaliation. Now, they were very cordial with me, but then, I forget, it was within a short period of time that all those people were at my gate, right? And then I was finding the venomous insects and the snake and so forth. It became apparent that we were not going to be able to live in peace. We ultimately decided to move, but that was, it was a very sketchy situation for a while. And this shamanic community did not take kindly, but apparently our prayer meetings were interfering on some level with their, let's say on a spiritual level with whatever activity was going on at Takiwasi. And they were very upset by that. So again, the shamanic community was very cordial with me until they weren't. And it was never a direct confrontation like shamans directly confronting me. It was sort of this underhanded subterfuge. So obviously we were disrupting, let's say, maybe perhaps the spiritual atmosphere in that neighborhood. I was friends with a particular shaman in Tarapoto, acquaintances really, with this individual. He was a rather famous guy. He was a younger guy. And I asked him one day, I was with him, and I said, explain to me what the modus operandi of ayahuasca is. What you as a shaman, what is it that you are there to do? What are you facilitating? Because the shamans are doing something. They're facilitating something. You don't just go sit in a corner and drink the brew. It's a whole ceremony. And he explained it to me in great detail. He walked me through it. And he said that the shaman, the role of the shaman in the ceremony of ayahuasca is to invite the spiritual entities of the jungle to come and inhabit people, and communicate with people and inhabit them. That's what he told me. He said, that's the role of the shaman. We're inviting these spirits in to have contact, to communicate with the participants. And he said to me that, we as shamans can sometimes see this happening. He said, for example, when I do an ayahuasca ceremony, everyone's in a circle, and I'm in the middle, and I'm summoning the spirits of the jungle. I'm summoning them to come. We're inviting them. We're asking them to come and to commune with us, to interact with us, to interface with us. And so we draw them in, and he said, I can see them sometimes. They come into the middle of the circle, and then they go from person to person, and they look in their eyes, and they go from person to person, and when they see whatever it is that they're looking for, they go into the person. That's exactly what he told me. He said they go into the person. And I asked him, I said, well, don't you think, what if it's something negative? Like, what if what you're inviting ends up destroying that person's life? And he said, well, that's why we're there. We're curating the experience. We are there to make sure that only the good guys come and so forth. And which is absurd, obviously, because you're dealing with consciousness. You're dealing with conscious beings that are much, as I said earlier, much older than you and much more intelligent than you. So there's no way that a shaman could ever control who's coming when you're making this invitation. You're beckoning these spirits, and if you think that you can control what you are summoning, then you're a fool. And this is, of course, the occult, and this is witchcraft, and this is what sorcerers have done for centuries, for millennia. Is the whole point of sorcery is to control demonic spirits, to try and control these entities. And that is what the occult is to some extent about. Is harnessing and controlling. There's something very strange going on, but this idea that you can control these entities, as I said, it's very dangerous because usually you can't. Usually it's them controlling you at that point. And I'll give you an example of how dangerous this can be. I was with a pastor friend of mine named Benny Humphreys in Tarapoto, Peru one time, and he invited me to come with him to go see this woman, go visit this woman who was in a very pitiable state after visiting a shaman. She was she went, I believe that the story goes that she went to a shaman. What they'll often do in the jungle, in Peru, Brazil, just all over the Amazon, it's common that if you've got if you've got a gripe with your neighbor or something like that, what you do is you obtain a piece of your neighbor's clothing, something that belongs to them, an object that belongs to them. You bring it to the shaman, and the shaman takes that object and they basically use it to put a curse on that person. But sometimes it backfires. So I believe in this particular case, this woman had gone to a shaman for that reason, or sometimes people often will go to a shaman to try and heal some sort of ailment. She went to the shaman and she was for all intents and purposes, she was fine. But shortly thereafter, her entire body locked up in a state of paralysis. She could not move. And we went and visited her, and it was pretty dire. I mean, it was bad. She was laying in bed, very emaciated, skeletal, obviously in great distress. She could not move. She was stiff as a board. And her family members said, this is what happened to me after I visited the shaman. Now, is that coincidental? Did she get stricken with some sort of illness, common illness? I don't know. I don't know. But this was the story, right? So again, I can't confirm or deny that was a result of the shamanism, but I've seen some pretty weird things as it pertains to shamanism. Pharmakia is likely referencing mind-altering psychedelics that come from plants. Ayahuasca in particular comes primarily from a vine. However, they make a brew using other ingredients. It's a very detailed process. The ingredients, the mixture, the brew, it's very complex. And it only works if you get it right. It's a mystery how the people in the jungle were able to concoct this brew so precisely that it creates the mind-altering effects and the duration of the effects. Because if you take the elements individually, you don't have the same experience. You have to mix them in this precise manner. You have to make the brew in a very precise manner for it to work, for it to induce that mind-altering state, that state of altered consciousness. So, and you're right, the shamans say that it was the spirits of the jungle, the spirits of the plants themselves that taught them how to make the brew. So I do believe that when we read about Pharmakia in the Book of Enoch, for example, that we are dealing precisely with mind-altering substances that are derived from plants. And let's not forget that the Vikings, the berserkers, used mind-altering psychedelics to enhance their aggression and to make them exceedingly brutal. And it induced a bloodlust in them that made them exceptional warriors. And they would be put into this frenzy before a battle, and they would oftentimes go to battle nude, and they were almost impervious to pain. They didn't fear death. They were kamikaze. The brutality was off the charts. One of the things that defines the world before the flood was the bloodlust and brutality, the murderous, sinister behavior of human beings. And I think that is directly connected, associated with psychedelics, with some of the pharmakia that they were using that was taught to them, according to the Book of Enoch, by the Watchers. And so when you combine the pharmakia with the metallurgy that was taught to them, they were instructed in how to make, swords and breastplates and armor and shields and so forth. It's probably a little bit more advanced than that, I would imagine. But when you mix the pharmakia with the metallurgy and the warfare, you can start to get an understanding of how brutal and violent the antediluvian world was. As it pertains to psychedelics are very interesting. You have all kinds of psychedelics out there that are derived from plants and mushrooms and vines. Psilocybin, for example, is being used now to treat people who are terminally ill because it helps them overcome a fear of death, right? And we all know that the big tech guys, Silicon Valley guys, are microdosing LSD, microdosing psilocybin, because it opens up their creativity and enhances their creativity. There seems to be a mechanism in the brain, sort of a pathway, a doorway that can be activated that allows people to communicate in an altered state of consciousness with what sometimes I like to think of as an internet of consciousness. We communicate through the internet via fiber optics, right? So it's a technological analogy of what I think is happening on the level of consciousness. I think there's let's call it a conscious World Wide Web, an internet of consciousness that you can plug into using psychedelics. And the problem is that human beings are at a great disadvantage in this scenario, because there are other non-human consciousnesses that are plugged into this internet of consciousness that are much older, much more ancient than us, much more knowledgeable, and are nefarious. And so when ignorant human beings plug into this thing via psychedelics, we become completely susceptible to manipulation by other more intelligent, more ancient entities who are plugged in. This seems to be what's going on with psychedelics. So yes, can you take psychedelics? Can you trip on psilocybin and receive information and enlightenment? Yes, but you're also completely open. You are making yourself open to manipulation of your perception. Human perception is not difficult to manipulate. And so the real danger, as far as I can tell, from psychedelics is this disadvantage that we have as human beings. We're plugging into something we don't understand, and we're opening ourselves up to manipulation. And people walk away having downloaded something. And that something, whatever it may be, whatever kind of experience they have, obviously people have bad experiences, the bad trips, which can damage them for life and cause all kinds of problems. I mean, there's people who take psychedelics who walk away with schizophrenia for the rest of their lives. They're hearing voices. They can't rid themselves of what they've invited into their lives via psychedelics. So it's dangerous on that end, but people who are proponents of psychedelics will say that's very uncommon, and that most people, and this may be true, most people who take psychedelics are going to be positively impacted for the rest of their lives. Fine, whatever. But the point is, you're interfacing with something that you cannot control, B, you do not understand. And I, for one, am not comfortable with that. I don't want to open myself up to something. I don't want to plug into something that we don't really understand. I don't want to open myself up to a manipulation by a consciousness that is much more intelligent than me. And that seems like a very bad idea. And it seems to be a gateway that is closed for a reason in the human species. In order to access this gateway, this level of consciousness, we have to take substances that put us in an altered state of consciousness. It doesn't seem natural to me. Perhaps at one time, and I would subscribe to this notion, the human species was able to access this internet of consciousness naturally and was capable of navigating it because we were We were a much more exceptional species in the beginning. In the genesis of the human species, I think we had many capabilities. I always say I think that we are a inherently telepathic species. I think that we could communicate telepathically in the beginning, but that capability has been lost over time and perhaps intentionally dampened because we're no longer the species we once were. In other words, we've lost the ability to operate, to communicate telepathically, and to perhaps plug into this internet of consciousness without being manipulated. We've degenerated both in our capabilities, but also morally speaking, and in our level of intelligence. We can no longer handle that kind of communication. So now the only way to reactivate that is through an artificial means, through the agency of ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD, and so forth. And again, people will tout the benefits of this, and that's fine. I understand why somebody who's on their deathbed suffering and fearing death would want to take some psilocybin. I get it. I understand that. And I'm not even necessarily opposed to it, but I would caution people. I personally won't do it because of all the reasons that I've listed, and I think that it's just unwise to willfully open ourselves up to something that we do not comprehend, cannot comprehend. And everyone wants to laud this great wisdom of the ancients and of these indigenous peoples, but we have to remember that there's a lot of really terrible things that have happened throughout history in association with these shamanic traditions. Let's not forget the Aztecs, the Maya, who would sacrifice people, and oftentimes these shamans, the priest class, would be in an altered state of consciousness. So it's not just like flowers and rainbows and unicorns. There's something very dark and sinister that comes through this gateway as well. We don't know what we're dealing with. And by the way, this is the reason why I think that people, when they're having these experiences in an altered state of consciousness, sometimes see gray aliens, sometimes see these, what do they call them, machine elves, and these different things. It's not necessarily that they're encountering these things in reality. What they're encountering are other consciousnesses that are tapped in. So if there's a physical being, let's say a gray alien, because gray aliens are unquestionably physical beings. If a gray alien is tapped into this internet of consciousness, then you're going to interface with it, because grays are very, very definitely a telepathic species. So, just like on the internet, it's very much like on the internet where you and I can be interfacing via Zoom or Skype. You're not there. You're not in the room with me. I am seeing a digital representation of you. And we are interfacing through fiber optics. We're interfacing through Wi-Fi. We're interfacing through technology. You're not actually there. You are sitting on the other side of the country in your bedroom, and I'm sitting in my bedroom, and we are looking at a screen, and we are interfacing with our consciousness through technology. Okay? That is a very good analogy of what I think is happening with psychedelics. You are interfacing in an internet of consciousness. You're not necessarily confronting beings who exist in this other dimension. For example, when we're interfacing again through Zoom, this isn't another dimension. Zoom is not another dimension. It's a technological facilitation of communication that's happening digitally. So that's what's going on, in my estimation, with psychedelics. The plants, the chemicals in these psychedelics, the DMT and so forth, gives us access to this communication domain. You're not there physically. When somebody's going through a psilocybin session, and they do this now in controlled environments, 6 hours, right? Whatever it is, 4 hours, 6 hours, depending on the dose. That person is usually laying down. They're prone on a bed or on a couch. And you can walk into the room and you can see that person just laying there, and you can touch them, interact with them. They might drink some water or whatever. There they are. But in their minds, they're somewhere else. They've plugged into something else. Their perceptual faculty has plugged in to the internet of consciousness, and they're seeing things that you're not, even though their body is right there. They haven't gone anywhere. You see? So that demonstrates the power of consciousness, of human perception and consciousness. It's very powerful. We don't understand it. It's not evil. Human consciousness and the interaction between conscious beings, this isn't evil. The reason why there's a prohibition on trying to contact the dead and other kinds of entities, spiritual entities in the Bible, is because of the reasons I cited previously. You're at a disadvantage. That prohibition is a protection for the human species. They aren't allowed to contact you otherwise. They're not. They're not allowed to interface with you unless you, or at least there's some kind of a prohibition there, because it's almost unheard of, unless people are dealing with schizophrenia or something like that, that an entity is going to come and communicate directly, interface directly with you. But if you try and make contact and you open yourself up to communication, it's not unheard of that something will begin to communicate with you, either through a Ouija board or through psychedelics or something else. So again, the prohibition exists, I think, we're talking about within the biblical context, to protect us from them.
Man-made intense reductions walks alone, follows Christ and the path he's shown. In the night where shadows glow, battles demons flesh and bone.